Okay, we'll reconvene the. Are we live?
Apologies, this was working earlier, as usually happens. That keeps putting me on hold. Did you ever lie? It's in. Okay. I just need to enable the camera. There. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. Hopefully I won't need your head today. Thank you.
Right, we'll reconvene the panel hearing the submissions to the draft district plan, and like to welcome Federated Farmers and listen to your summary of your written submission, which we've read and discussed. Just like to ask, does anybody feel they've got any conflicts of interest before we invite the submission? I have to say I'm a farming person, I'm not a member of Fed, so I don't feel I'm conflicted. And hand over to you, Bridget.
Thank you
Bernadette, sorry, got the B right.
All the time. Thank you very much. So thank you for the opportunity to be here to submit and present. My name is Bernadette Hunt and I'm a member of the Southland Provincial Executive for Federated Farmers. I've been involved in a variety of RMA and local government planning processes as a farmer representative. I'm not a planner. And I do have practical experience as a farm owner operator. Rachel Thomas, who's online, is a senior policy advisor with Federated Farmers. She has over 10 years experience in local government and is also a farm and owner operator. So she'll be able to help with most of the questions, I think, as they come. Our main points are as follows. We note that the terms existing use rights and lawfully established. Is that better? Could you hear me before? Do I need me to repeat myself?
We certainly could hear you.
All good. So we note that the terms existing use rights and lawfully established are both used within the proposed district plan. We accept the reporting officer's comments relating to the varied use of each term. However, we do recommend that for consistency, the council consider if it intends to include existing lawfully established or lawfully established existing, as both are currently used. The use of multiple terms which are not defined is confusing for plan users. So we recommend that council consider amending the wording throughout the plan to ensure consistency. The best approach for this would be to remove the word existing from existing lawfully established as it features in Eco R1 and lawfully established existing as recommended in the definition of reverse sensitivity. And the second point, in terms of the reverse sensitivity definition, it's our view that an activity is approved if it is lawfully established. From the Section 42A report, it appears that the intent is to define what is meant by approved. It's our preference that instead you go for a simplified definition as we propose in our submission. And the final point, we do not agree with the reporting officer's recommendation for UFD 010. We requested that under UFD 010, primary production and rural industry activities are not only recognised, but also protected. We note that the latter part of UFD 01 is about the contribution made as opposed to the actual activity. Sorry, that should be 010 as well. The contribution made as opposed to the actual activity. Our proposed wording ensures that the contribution is protected, and this may be achieved by the council considering the impact of decisions on the rural sector's ability to contribute to the district's economic and social well-being. If the contribution made by the rural sector is only recognised, there's actually no protection for the contribution made. And we know that the contribution made to the economy locally by the rural sector is really significant. And we see time and time again, whenever there's a downturn in the economic well-being of the rural sector, that has really pervasive impacts throughout the whole economy of the local area. Yeah, I'll leave it there. We're happy to take questions, and Rachel is also.
Matt, do you have some questions to address those points? Comment of clarification, sorry.
Yeah, I think if I can just update those in the room. So at the start of the hearing, I circulated some supplementary evidence where I've gone through the evidence that was provided for the panel. I guess in relation to the points raised, I'm agreeing that lawfully established isn't a defined term and it should be de-italicized, if that's a word. And I guess in relation to UFD 010, I'm suggesting that the wording should be recognised and provided for rather than recognised and protected. And the reasons for that are outlined in paragraphs 19 through to 21.
Rachel, did you want to comment on that? I know she had a minute to have a look at this beforehand.
Yes, I will. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll comment around UFD 010. So another reason that we're going for protection for primary production and rural industry activities is because we don't feel that UFD 011 is sufficient in terms of Objective 2.1 of the NPS HPL. So the Objective 2.1 states highly productive land is protected for use in land-based primary production, both now and for future generations. And then the proposed UFD 011 is productive, versatile land and natural, physical and cultural resources located within rural areas that are of significance to the district are protected and maintained. So basically, that's awarded protection only for areas that are considered significant. And so we're asking for UFD 010 to be extended to all, that protection to be extended to all areas.
Do you have a comment, Bernadette, on that change from your request from protected to recognised and provided for?
I would have to defer to Rachel on it, but just because I'm not a planner and I know that these terms are quite specific in terms of the way they play out, so I would need to defer to Rachel on it. Yeah.
Do you like to comment, Rachel?
Sorry, go ahead.
Your preference is to use the word protected for primary production and supporting activity. The planning officers come back with a alternative recognised and provided for. How does that, doesn't quite meet exactly what you've asked for, how does that sit with you? What's your opinion on that wording?
It's not exactly what we're asking for, and just in terms of the NPS HPL, the wording is protected, and we don't feel that there's enough protection provided through the proposed UFD 011, because that only applies to areas of significance. And if we think about the point of this chapter, which is urban form and development, it's very important that we ensure that rural land is protected, and that is one of the higher level objectives. And I guess an alternative to that is to potentially look at adding a new objective into UFD 01 that recognised and protected primary production activities.
Thank you. Panel will certainly be having some ongoing discussions around about that, around that submission and the definition that you're asking for. So I think we will get back to you, obviously.
Thanks.
If the word protected is there at an objective level, how do you see that being followed through to objectives and rules?
Rachel?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Was it how do we see protected being
Yep.
followed through into objectives?
If protected is provided for in an objective, how do you see that being followed through to policies and rules? Because the word protective has a higher threshold than other words.
Okay, yeah, I understand what you mean. So I guess we're really thinking about in terms of future development, so making sure that primary production as an activity is adequately protected in terms of urban form and development.
I'll ask either of you, would the phrase recognised, provided for and maintained be a little closer to where you're wanting to land?
I think it's a step closer. Our preference is protected. However, yeah, I guess provided for is enabling it to occur enabling rural activities to occur.
This might be a step too far, so recognised, provided for and maintained in its, as it exists, or maintained as an existing activity in its form as an existing activity. I'm just snatching stuff out of the air, but trying to move protected perhaps has some overarching, wider reaching ramifications for the plan, so trying to head that way.
Yeah, what about enabled?
We'll write that down and discuss it. Back to you, Bernadette.
Just hold on, just while I write this down, please.
That's okay. We're just open for
Okay.
comments, questions.
The UFD Objective 1, thank you. I'm the one who points it out to everyone else. UFD Objective 1, a recommendation has been made in response to what you've raised, that an addition be made to number 10 that says considers the potential loss of highly productive soils. So I guess I'll give you an opportunity to answer, and also for our advisors. As an objective, it would then be the district develops in a cohesive, compact and structured way that considers the potential loss of highly productive soils. Considering something does not lead to an outcome. Mm-hmm. So if the intent is to actually protect or ensure that highly productive soils are not lost, then I actually question the verb considers. So I'd just appreciate some feedback, both from Rachel, I guess, and then also from Mr. Hill. Sorry, I'm being a bit informal there, Rachel.
Go for it, Rachel.
Yes, I would agree. I think considered doesn't quite go enough, and I would be looking for enable or protects in that instance as well.
Before you do, your recommendation there refers to productive soils, but elsewhere in the plan it refers to productive land.
I tend to agree that considers probably is too weak in that setting. It's not directive, and highly productive land may be more appropriate to implement the MPS HPL.
Can I just add something there as well? I think there are large swathes of land in the Gore district that are highly productive, but they may not fall into the classification of a highly productive soil. So I would consider that.
But don't we have a national policy statement that talks about highly productive land, and is defined as class 1 to 3 land under the land use inventory worksheet? So I accept your point, but I'm just thinking from, I guess, a semi-legal point of view, that we are constrained in the way that we can use it unless we use other words, notwithstanding the government's indicated it's going to actually have another look at it, but that's another issue.
Which is where, I guess, the primary production and rural industry activities is a broader, when you think about, some of the land that falls outside classes 1 to 3 that produces, significant economic benefit for the district. Did we want to capture that?
If I could just quickly comment in terms of the national direction, the district context can provide you with a basis to redirect that in a different way. So if there is an abundance of highly productive land, perhaps then in this district or in another district, it might be that the national direction needs to be amended or altered slightly to reflect the fact you also want to provide for other activities and not hamstring those ones.
So in saying the national direction can be altered, we can alter it to apply to the way that it fits here.
That would be my submission.
Within constraints
Within submission constraints, 100%.
and within the constraints of the national direction in terms of the extent to which you can be more restrictive or more permissive.
And also, with respect to evidence, you would need evidence to demonstrate that there was an alternative context here.
I'm not sure, Commissioner Lavelle, if you're ready for me. It's just that this issue of giving effect to the MPS HPL, if I've understood your evidence and what I'm hearing, that's what you're leaning on to use the word protect.
I'm not sure if you can see Rachel, but that was directed to you. She's looking up at the screen. She says that.
I'm assuming that's directed to me. I'm
Yes.
actually finding it a little bit difficult to hear some of you, but so the question was, are we relying on the MPS HPL for the use of the word protect?
Yes.
Yes, I believe so, and I think just falling back to the UFD 011, it doesn't provide appropriate protection as per the MPS HPL because it refers to those significant areas. So I guess what we'd like to see is an addition of number 10 to UFD 01 or the amendment that we had suggested.
So there's a number of things I want to tease out around the application of the MPS HPL, and my reason for doing that is the question really that Commissioner Lavelle led out with, which was around the implications of using the word protect when you take it down through provisions, and being very careful about our use of protect because of that. And often when we're using that word, it's coming through some national direction, which is what you've just pointed towards, or sitting in the RMA itself. So if we follow through just with the MPS HPL, which is very directive and we must give effect to it, as well as obviously giving effect to the RPS, and that in giving effect to that instrument, it's very clear about highly productive land. It's also really clear around land-based primary production. In other words, it's preserving the protection of the highly productive land, which we know is those classes 1 to 3, and that there would have to be another process outside of this one to identify other highly productive land that might need protecting. That it's protecting that land for land-based primary production, which is very specific, and excludes mining activities, for instance. It's preserving that land for agricultural, horticultural, forestry. So if that's if we're leaning on national direction in picking something up in these objectives, do we have to be careful about what we're capturing in that, i.e. being specific about land-based primary production, for instance, and being specific about identified highly productive land?
Yes, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. However, I think I just don't quite feel that the wording proposed is quite got enough, has got the right level of protection that we're actually after. The word enable is used quite frequently in the rural zone chapter, so perhaps that would be one that would be more appropriate.
Could we, for instance, I think I was picking up your emphasis on the word enable. I'm just trying to tease something out a little bit in that I think we might be talking about different types of land, different types of productive land or highly productive land, some of that land already has some very clear national direction that it must be protected, which you've identified, and therefore our objectives need to reflect that. What I've heard from Bernadette is that the district has also got highly productive land that sits out of those classes, so it can't rely on the protection that's directly given by that MPS. And what you're both saying is we want to ensure that there's an enabling focus for, and here's where I'm going to pause for a moment and go for land-based primary production / and or primary production that incorporates mining. So what I'm trying to do, if you're following me, is kind of tease out from you what needs to be protected because of national direction, what needs to be enabled, and what's captured in both buckets. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I think, are you referring to changing the definition of primary production activities?
The primary production definition, I believe, relies on the national planning standards. The land-based primary production definition would be drawing straight from the MPS HPL, and that they are different. And the difference between them is that mining activities are excluded from land-based primary production, which is what is protected on highly productive land. So what I'm trying to draw from you, thinking about the evidence that you've already given, is perhaps thinking about what needs protecting and what needs enabling, and where the impetus to protect and the impetus to enable is coming from.
Okay, so UFD 010 is currently written as general in the sense that it applies to primary production and all rural industry activities.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just not quite sure if you're suggesting that they're separated out in order to provide some that are recognised and then some that are protected. Is that your intention, or?
I'm sort of suggesting that if you're relying on the MPS HBL, it's narrower than that objective as written. It's narrower and it does require protection. So the point that you've made is you want to see protection go into that objective, and you've pointed to the MPS HPL, but it is narrower in scope than what UFD 010 is doing. And so that if we want to be careful about that, do you think you would support some differentiation?
Sorry, I missed that last part of what you were saying.
Would you support differentiating between what is protected by the MPS HBL and what might otherwise need to be enabled, for instance?
Okay, yes, I understand, yeah. So objective 2.1 is about land-based primary production specifically. Is that what you're meaning? 2.1 of the MPS HPL?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to listen to the previous, or the speakers that we've had throughout the day? Have you been able to follow the hearing up to this point?
I'm sorry, I'm really having trouble hearing what you're saying.
I'll try, actually, I can see why, because now I can hear myself and I couldn't before.
No, I can hear you now, thank
sorry everyone who's been listening and hasn't been able to hear me. Now, what was my point? Oh, yeah. Have you been able to listen to the hearing up to this point in the day?
I have listened to some, but I've actually had a little bit of trouble with the stream on YouTube.
So we had a submitter before lunch, Mr. Ware, who was highlighting an issue with potential for harm from unregulated or under-regulated carbon farming in the district. And we had a conversation around the MPS HPL land-based primary production definition, which includes forestry, and whether it was possible to differentiate different types of forestry, i.e. plantation forestry that's harvested versus long-term carbon forests that are not harvested, and whether or not either or both of you want to add anything to that conversation.
Rachel, I'll let you. Anything I add will be anecdotal. I'm no expert in that area.
We didn't take a position on forestry in the submission, and I think, Bernadette, you'll know more about the state of forestry in the district, but we don't have a comment on it because we didn't take any position in our initial submission.
Very good, thank you.
I can comment just in generally that forests that are planted without intent of harvest obviously have a significant difference in terms of what they do within a community and the economic impact, you know, employment and that kind of stuff in the broader community. So that is a general concern of federated farmers.
Has that been?
I'll just add, I think a lot of the concerns from Mr. Ware, who I did hear a little bit of his presentation, was around investors coming into the district and taking up highly productive land, which may otherwise be used for farming, and that's certainly concerns that we share as well.
Yeah, and I can add just a little bit to that. Sorry for the tag team. I'm very aware that right now, with the rural downturn that we're having, there is more value being placed on dry stock land, sheep and beef farming traditional land, by people who can purchase land for trees than there is by people that can purchase the land for farming. And that's being exacerbated by the fact that banks are very cautious right now about lending money to people purchasing blocks for sheep and beef farming. So there is a real risk here if there's not some protection put in place on land use.
And that would relate to how we define what is enabled and what is protected.
Absolutely, yes.
Maria, I've got a question just for my own clarity. Am I correct in understanding you were trying to tease out some more detail? The MPS HPL doesn't provide, in your opinion, as much protection for highly productive land than it does for highly productive soils?
Highly productive land is defined.
By highly productive soils.
There is a process to identify it, but until that process is undertaken, there's a clear reference in there to class 1 to 3 soils as falling within what we would understand nationally to be highly productive land. I think what we've just heard from Bernadette is that there are productive lands in the district
Yes.
that might be valued for their current activity that can't rely on the HPL protection. I think that's that's what we're canvassing at the moment, and that those would be the lands that would be targeted at the moment in terms of potential increase in forestry activity.
I think you said there was another policy that offered more production, more protection, potentially, outside the definition of highly protected soils in HPL.
I think use of the term protection where it's directed to us by national direction like the MPS HPL, that's something we have to give effect to. And our conversation up to this point also included Ms Thomas indicating that the word enable might be an alternative that could be used in support of productive land and activities that are not able to rely on that national direction protection. Is that a good summary, Ms Thomas?
That was directed at me.
Yeah, sorry, I'll lean in closer even.
I just missed the end of what you're saying each time, but yes, that's a good summary, and I guess I'll also just draw your attention to the wording in UFD 010. Really, it's the contribution that's protected, or that we're suggesting is protected because of the way the sentence is structured. So it's not the actual activity, but the contribution that the activity makes to economic and social well-being and prosperity.
Yeah, and so I think that brings us back to where we started, which is where do you look to use that word protect in terms of higher level instruments and the RMA itself, which is quite an important question for us.
Yeah.
Can I give an example that might help as to why that land that may not fall into the highly protected soils classifications? So farming is very much an interrelated system in New Zealand. So on the potentially less productive soils, a lot of stock is born and reared to a certain point and then trucked to other farms where the finishing occurs. And unless that stock is born somewhere in the first place, where do the more productive soils get the stock from to complete the growing, which then provides the trucking companies with work, provides shearers with work, provides the meat processing companies with the stock to process. So if you take out one class out of farming, then it has a massive impact on all of the other classes as well.
And that might be the difference between enabling the activity versus protecting lands from encroachment, because you did also, Ms Thomas, highlight concern around UFD and urban encroachment into these lands, so which is what the MPS HPL concerns itself with, like the expansion and encroachment of urban form into highly productive lands, and that might be a bit different to thinking in the way that Bernadette was just describing about the nature of the activities that occur, how they are enabled and how they are interrelated. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's two different issues going on, and that we might handle them quite differently. And maybe the interrelated system point relates to the enablement idea, and maybe the encroachment issue is more to do with the protection idea that comes from the MPS HPL. Would you agree?
Yes, I agree, yeah, and I think particularly when you consider the contribution in terms of the effects on the district's economy, as Bernadette explained, then that emphasises our point about why we're pushing so much for protection or enablement.
Thank you, both of you.
Continue, if you wish.
Is there anything
That's
further that people would like to ask or have clarified?
Just an observation. You'll be coming back for future hearings, and we look forward to it. From our point of view, it would be very helpful if in your submissions, when referring to an amendment to blah blah, make reference to what your submission point number was, like 126057, was the case of that, and also the paragraph number of where it is in the planner's section 42A report. because we're jumping from one document to the other, and the quicker we can do it, the better.
Sure.
Much
Thank you.
appreciated, thank you.
Sorry, that was a long pause on my part to allow others to interject, but I do have a couple more questions. I just wanted to test, in terms of concerns around what is enabled and how that links to existing use and what is lawfully established. Is the enablement that you're thinking about more related to expansion or future development, or are you also thinking of it in terms of what already exists? And when answering that question, thinking about what might already be provided for as existing use rights, or falling within that idea of lawfully established or existing use.
I guess we're thinking in terms of future development, so making sure that the ability for primary production to exist is adequately protected or enabled. And then just relating back to the contribution, it's, you know, agriculture is the backbone of this district's economy, so we're trying to emphasise that that contribution is adequately covered for in terms of future development.
And then I've got one last question, which is, it's really just to draw out if either of you have any particular thoughts about the relationship of the district plan with implementing the MPSFM, where it points towards territorial authorities and their role, and just whether you've got any comments to make on that.
Rachel, did you?
I did note that there were some comments in the evidence presented by Mr. Hill that I haven't actually had a chance to read about existing legislation and the difficulty that councils are in at the moment with so much legislation up in the air, so to speak. So I feel like I can't actually make comment on that without having read that evidence.
That's all right.
Yeah, I apologise. I'm not completely sure where that question was going, so I'm not. Yeah, but it may be more of a planning oriented. Yeah.
I'm expecting, or I'll ask you, are you concerned that the existing activity of agriculture and farming as is practiced presently is maintained and preserved and protected to carry on? Is that what you would like to see considered or accommodated within the plan?
Absolutely, and I think one of the really key considerations is that that changes over time. You know, the flexibility of land use farming is always changing and evolving. It needs to, and so we've got to also be careful that things don't get locked in and forced to stay as they are now, because that's not how farming works.
So I guess to recognise agriculture as a dynamic activity. Okay.
Very much so, and dynamic over time, but also within chunks of time. You know, we need to be able to be flexible to cope with changing climate, changing markets, changing technology. You know, it's not. There are some real challenges right now with the way the NPSFM has locked in land use. So, you know, as an example, with this current downturn, sheep and beef farmers looking to take on a bit of dairy grazing to help pay the bills can't. So those kinds of things, when flexibility is taken away, it makes these economic impacts much harder to bear, because people don't have the flexibility to turn to the thing that helps them get through automatically.
Through you, Mr Chair, Bernadette, would that be more an Environment Southland ruling on intensive farming that contributes to not being able to take on dairy grazing sheep and beef farmers?
Yes, Environment South and national rules actually,
And national rules,
but we
right.
just need to be careful that, you know, within local territorial plans that we don't end up creating some sort of perverse outcome by trying to be restrictive. It has flow-on effects, yeah.
So the only stable thing is its economic contribution.
Absolutely.
Not sure if we can get that in there, but
That's me, I've run out of questions.
any more questions from the panel members? Look, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Bernadette. I'm sorry I got your name wrong.
That's okay, it happens all the time. You got the B.
And thank you very much, Ms Thomas. We'll look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Where's the Stony Creek one? Have I got Stony Creek submission?
It was on a different,
What? Oh, okay. Right, we'll invite a presentation from Stony Creek, and if you've got anything, any notes to table, that would also be handy. Hi Brett, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, Commissioners. For you that don't know me, my name is Brett Highstead, General Manager of the Tulloch Group and also a Director of Stony Creek Station. I'm accompanied by Annette Tulloch. I have an apology from Ian, who had a medical appointment in Christchurch today, so he couldn't make it. Ian and Annette are the owners of Stony Creek Station and also have governance over the property. Our presentation is relatively brief at this stage of the hearing process, primarily to give our actions to date and our submission some context. And that's really in terms of our journey. Looking at your timetable, we're probably the first less technical submitter, and it's coming from landowners rather than from experts. I have a couple of photos which, if I may, table just that we'll speak to later. Can I table those? So just to give some background, Ian and Annette have been guardians of Stony Creek Station for some 25 years. The property was a gorse and rabbit infested blight on the district when Ian and Annette purchased it. The photos that you have show the contrast in the property between 1999 and 2023, the left-hand photo being 1999. And that's just a very small part of the property that is seen from the roadside. In the last 10 years alone, Ian and Annette have invested in excess of $1 million in weed and pest management, and the process is ongoing. Like rust, gorse does not sleep. And I think this investment demonstrates their commitment to preserving the land. The property reflects the Tulloch family's own values, and these values are important, such as conservation efforts, providing employment, lifestyle and intergenerational ownership. But at the end of the day, the station has to be economic to be sustainable. Farming is not new in the Hokanui Hills. It was established in some respects somewhere in 1901. The landscape the district appreciates only exists because of the presence of farming and the investment by the owners. And what I mean by this is the alternative without farming remaining economic is the reversion to gorse and broom. It will not regenerate as a clean native block, but will be dominated by pest species. In terms of our submission, you will note that we've made a comprehensive submission to the plan as a whole, along with specific chapters and provisions. So we will be back in front of you over the next 9 months with the appropriate experts from time to time. So I guess at this juncture, the issue at hand is the consultation failure by the council, and it is important to context the reasons for our actions to date. The council did not consult with the station or, to our knowledge, its neighbours on multiple significant changes in rules, and uniquely concentrated on 2 large-scale farming properties. Furthermore, as outlined in para 78 and 79 of your section 42A report, the chapters titled Ecosystems and Indigenous Biodiversity, along with Natural Features and Landscapes, were withheld from the draft plan that was released for feedback. But instead, the council workshopped these chapters with key select stakeholders, notably not with significantly affected landowners. This is inconsistent in our view with the efforts the council went to engage with the likes of the Mandeville Village. We were blindsided when the plan was publicly notified. What should have occurred in our view was a targeted consultation, given that Stony Creek Station represents 42% of the outstanding natural landscape, covering 65% of the station. So Stony Creek Station represents the majority. Also, the specialised nature of hill country farming, where you need that hill country farming knowledge and practical input to create appropriate rules. Also, the multiple rule changes proposed in the Rural Ecosystems and Indigenous Biodiversity and Natural Features and Landscape chapters affecting Stony Creek Station. Some of these provisions are wholly unworkable and could have been overcome if stations such as Stony Creek Station were correctly identified as key stakeholders. So as a result, we needed to take legal action and advice to ensure the unworkable rules, such as Eco Rule 1, which limited the ability to reasonably fence the property and have immediate effect, were withdrawn, but also to seek an adequate consultation process. Based on our discussions leading up to our letter of 7 November, which is your Appendix D in the Section 42A report, we were again blindsided by the Council's decision to make only one change to Eco Rule 1. We do note that at para 147 of your Section 42A report provides a recommendation to reject our submission and states, to read that, the Council also notes that while there was no breach of the statutory obligations to consult under the RMA, it would have preferred to have taken direct consultation with Stony Creek Station. We disagree with the comments in there made around inaccuracies and obligations to consult, noting that we both have our legal and professional advice, and from experience they often differ. So our position remains that we do not accept the 42A report and we reserve our legal position. But we will work with the Council in an effort to achieve a mutual outcome in the interim. So from here, the key points made in our submission at a full plan level will be further addressed through the individual chapters as they come up, unless central government policy clarifies the direction. Thank you.
How's the additional consultation going thus far?
Yet to commence.
Yet to commence, okay. I don't think I've got any questions on what you've submitted, because the panel will have to wait what emanates from the further consultation. But I do accept your point that you felt you required or should have had more consultation, and I'm pleased to see that that's underway. I appreciated the photographs and the 25 years of effort that's been described by the present owners. And thank you for your submission and for your presence.
Thank you.
And thank you for
sorry,
referring to the paragraph numbers, just bearing in mind going forward, please. Thank you.
I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
And they actually, they relate to your submission that I think, you know, targets this hearing chapter. Well, my first question is actually, it goes to what you've just said, which is our first non-technical expert who's come along, and I'm really intrigued by the definition dead hole, which then refers to it being an offal pit that's used for on-farm disposal of dead stock. And I'm more familiar with that term offal pit and wondered why it didn't just say offal pit instead of dead hole. And it made me wonder if dead hole is a term that's used, it's more prevalent in this district, and whether you had any light that you could shed on a preference for dead hole or offal pit.
I don't think I can comment for the farming community.
No, but just from your own,
Dead hole, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. I mean, just that you use that term
It's anecdotal, I guess.
is helpful for me to know. That's fine. You don't have to speak for the whole district, just for yourself.
I can just say, coming from a farming background, we always had a dead hole as well.
Yeah.
And it comes from the regional policy statement that actually considered offal just as a small component of what went into the dead hole. So it's more commonly used here.
Fantastic. That's helpful. That's off the table. And then I saw that in your submission you were talking and concerned about farm infrastructure and making sure that farm infrastructure was captured and potentially defined so that it wasn't missed off from anything that might be enabling. And I just wanted to check whether you would consider your farm infrastructure to sort of be an integral part of your agricultural, horticultural and pastoral activities, i.e. that idea of the activity having, like scooping up the notion of the farm infrastructure might be a way to do it, as opposed to having a separate definition for farm infrastructure, maybe?
Yeah, I guess our submission found it wasn't adequately captured because farming requires, you know, a large number of structures and infrastructure to undertake its activity, and some of that, wasn't well defined. So, how you package that, I guess, is would be of interest to us. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd like to see us fix it. You're not too concerned about how it's fixed, i.e. it might not need a separate definition as long as it's captured.
As long as it's captured correctly. Yes.
Yeah. And I was interested to hear about the journey in terms of the gorse and the rabbits, and we've got submitters that we're hearing from today that are pointing to the issue of wilding trees, and it strikes me that's another pest issue like gorse, like rabbits, and I thought it might be interesting to hear from a landowner what a plan's role might be in helping with that, or what it is that landowners might need to support, especially where you're a large landowner. And does Stony Creek have experience managing wilding trees as well?
Yeah, I think it's property specific, and Stony Creek doesn't have a widespread problem with wildings. The challenge is the gorse broom and rabbits. There are some isolated areas, but only very minor. So I think it really depends who your neighbour is, what the activity is on the neighbouring property, and how that affects your own property. So haven't really turned their minds to that particular issue.
Right.
Yeah.
But an activity on a neighbouring property that might be of concern, what would that entail? When you said that, what were you thinking of?
Well, I was thinking we don't have pine plantations on neighbouring properties that would have the wind blown seeding issues. So.
I have thought of a question, and it's
Okay.
not related to this submission today, but your further stuff you supply. If the farming activity as practiced today on Stony Creek had to be modified by exclusion of some access, or what would happen to that? What would happen to those areas that you're currently farming productively and you were excluded from using them? What would happen?
Well, simply they would have to be left, and they would revert to gorse and broom. They'd become unproductive, and look, this, farming can't stand still. Farming needs to progress and go forward. And a property like Stony Creek Station hasn't had generations of development work done on it in terms of controlling gorse and broom. So it's got a lot of work to do just to catch up. And in any area where there is gorse and broom, it spreads. It spreads into land that you've already eradicated, or you think you've eradicated the weed. So I think the photo you see in front of you from 1999 is what will happen and would occur. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I guess I'll get you to clarify. So you're saying neglecting an area in an effort to protect it would actually make it worse?
I think you need to look at the DOC estate to get that answer.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
I'll now invite representatives from Greenbrier to come and make a submission, if we have such a person. No?
Online.
Online. Welcome. Hello. We're ready to listen to your submissions when you're ready to deliver it.
Thank you. Can you hear us okay like that?
Yep.
So just introducing ourselves, my name is Bridget Irving, and I'm counsel for Greenbrier Limited, and with me I have Megan Justice, who has filed a brief of evidence. I just have some brief legal submissions that I will take you through. I have a slight confusion
support of this approach, Greenbrier is calling evidence from the justice which we have pre-filed. At Appendix 1 to my legal submissions, I've set out a legal framework applicable to your decision making on the proposed plan. I don't propose to take you through that because I suspect you will be familiar with it. I've also cross-checked it against my friend Ms. Chadwick's submissions, and we're
It would now be a good time to stay on that point rather than sort of circle back. And so I think if what I just heard then was maybe a concern that the conversation that was picking out the difference between primary production and land-based primary production could, if we're not careful, result in some unintended constraint on Greenbrier. Would I understand that's what you mean? That you're looking to avoid.
At the moment, the position being advanced in the Section 42A report effectively is UFD 010, which is about primary production generally, supports activities such as those that Greenbrier undertakes because it is primary production in a broad sense. If UFD 10 was to be narrowed in some way, then that would leave activities such as those that Greenbrier undertakes without that policy support or provision support. So as you work through, I suppose, how you may not choose to accommodate submissions of various parties, you just need to be awake to how that the narrowing or expanding of those things might affect other activities. And I think tends to support our approach, which is to identify or have separate provisions that deal with activities like mining, quarrying, renewable energy generation, which are all really important activities in terms of supporting community wellbeing, and particularly in a district like Gore, which is heavily reliant on agriculture, so that lacuna isn't created.
Yeah, so I just want to check that there's some acceptance that perhaps, this is what I'm going to ask, between what we might be required to protect and what we might want to enable. And that the distinction being drawn, for instance, between highly productive land and land-based primary production, following the protection set down by the MPS HPL, and what we might want to enable in terms of broader primary production that would scoop in Greenbrier, understanding that if we are to look to that national direction in the HPL and rely upon it for the protection of those that highly productive land, in doing so and differentiating that, you're also pointing to the exemptions sitting in there that would then enable the mining. So you're following that conversation with Federated Farmers was very much around being clear what is to be protected and what is given protection by national direction, and what we might want to otherwise enable. And so sort of starting there, if we follow that line, is that starting out on the right footing in terms of addressing the concerns that you're raising?
Yeah, well, I mean, you are required to obviously give effect to the national policy statement, and that does, as was discussed, require protection of certain classes of soils. That same document does also provide a pathway or exemptions for certain activities, and I suppose, in essence, we're seeking a reflection of that via the amendments that we've sought in our submission.
And in order to do that, we might need to be clear about language.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
And thinking about this possibly might be more of a misjustice question. Yeah, we might. I might leave that for her. But thank you, Ms. Irving. If there's anything the panel members have, I'll rest.
do you have any comments, Matt?
Well, might pay to hear from Megan first.
Okay.
So it may not have come through, so it may be better to hear from Megan first rather than continue the questions.
Is that just extractive use, or would it be those that are provided the exemption in terms of being locationally or operationally constrained?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
You were suggesting a standalone objective that was specifically about extractive industry. And my question was, given what you've just said, would it actually be more about activities that are locationally or operationally constrained and where the national direction provides for their consideration, or provides a pathway for them?
The wording for the objective that we sought, and I can read it out for you if you like, it was more general than just specifying extraction activities. So it was activities reliant on the locationally constrained resources or with the functional and operational needs that dictate the location they are provided for.
Yeah, I was just checking that you were intending to be broader. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to jump in there, when we were preparing the submission, we sort of identified this issue, obviously in relation to Greenbrier, but more generally as well, for other activities like renewable energy, quarrying and so on, and I think it applies to all of those activities. And really, because this is scaffold for the plan, by keeping those provisions general
I've got quite a few, but I'll let Matt go first. And I think I need to give others a chance because I've got a few lines to run. Yep.
Can I suggest we hear from Matt before we ask any further questions? Because listeners may need to comment.
Yeah, okay. Just to update everyone in the room, or not in the room, sorry. I was recommending a change to UFD 010, which includes recognised and provided for at the end. And the reason I was proposing that wording is because primary production is broadly defined, and so it captures land-based primary production and mining, etc. And so I had concerns about having a specific objective that talks about recognising that some resources and associated activities are locationally constrained, because that could apply anywhere to anything, potentially, whereas the issue seems to be more about providing for primary production in the rural environment, effectively. And so that's the rationale for where I've landed. As I said, I've expanded it to include recognise and provide for, because that gives direction to the, I guess, zone-specific provisions to make sure that primary production is actually provided for, and that might be through a permitted, controlled or restricted discretionary consent. Because I think Greenbrier acknowledged that these things need a consent. And so that's the rationale for my thinking. So I thought I'd just, hopefully that's helpful.
So I just wanted to pick up on the point that Ms. Irving just made around thinking about the nature of activities and the difference between them, and how that might lead to different approaches to those activities. Thinking about the highly productive land and that NPS, and the pathway that you've pointed to around identifying appropriateness and following that path, if the purpose of that MPS is to, and just tell me if you agree that in general this is not a bad way to describe it, is trying to avoid encroachment and locking up of this kind of land so that it's constrained from future use. That might be one of the things that it's trying to achieve. Is the nature of New Vale's activity, because it involves the rehabilitation and subsequent reuse after completion of mining, is that something that differentiates it from other activities that might not have that characteristic? In terms of the purpose of the MPS and its attempt to prevent highly productive land from being encroached upon and locked up. That's what I'm pointing towards, and I'm picking up the point that Ms. Irving was making around that activities in their nature might need to be treated differently. And so I'm asking, is this characteristic of this activity, something that, provides for some different treatment?
Yeah, I mean, just having gone through the process of working through the clause 3.9 of the NPS highly productive land, the temporary use is one of those categories that you can use to demonstrate that your activity is not inappropriate. But you also need to demonstrate a whole lot of other things as well. So I'm not sure that being able to actually define the activity as being a temporary use of the productive land is enough to give effect to the NPS for highly productive land. I think it is more about, the reason that I think a new objective that recognises the constraints associated with activities that are locationally constrained is needed is because inadvertently you come back to the highly productive land question and the method that you must go through under the NPS for highly productive land, and there's ultimately a tension there between the activity and demonstrating whether or not it's appropriate and the use of highly productive land, and having a separate policy that's separate to the policy 10 which provides for primary production uses, I think is necessary for these particular activities that are in fact locationally constrained.
And in other words, it's providing a pathway is what you're looking for, which was Mr. Heel's point.
Yeah, I suppose a couple of things I'd add there from, I suppose, an interpretation point of view. I mean, the NPS HPL has obviously identified the pathways for assessing whether an activity is inappropriate or not, and it has identified activities like Greenbriers as being activities that need to meet certain thresholds for them to be found to be appropriate. So what that tends to tell me is that as a general proposition, restricted activities like Greenbriers will be inappropriate on highly productive land, sort of unless they can work their way through the exemptions. So when you look at that and then go to UFD 010, the question it raises for me is when we've got multiple types of primary production that could be undertaken on a piece of land, how do you again mediate the tension between those? And at the moment, UFD 010 doesn't really assist us with that. So you've got primary production being farming, which we have to has to be able to operate efficiently and effectively, and you've got primary production mining, which has to be able to operate efficiently and effectively, and it kind of doesn't help you figure out when one of those means the other can't happen, or vice versa, which one of those might prevail or not. And by including a provision around the locationally constrained resources, in our view, assisted plan makers to kind of identify that pathway through for that narrow class of activities that may compromise land-based primary production, let's say, in favour of another form of primary production that the district also requires.
So I think you are pointing to...
What we say is reflected in the way that the NPS's work
Mm.
and why they have included those sort of exemption provisions.
And I think that takes us back to where we began in terms of being clear about, use of language.
Yeah, I mean, the primary production definition, which I think from memory comes from the planning standards,
Mm-hmm.
it is extremely broad, and that does create some challenges if you just adopt it, because there's
and that there might be places in the plan where the broad term primary production is appropriate and places where more defined terms may be needed.
Yes, yeah.
Can I just ask a question? If you were consented to use highly productive land for mining, what then is the classification when that area is returned back into farming, into agriculture? So what state is the land when you've mined it and you're returning it back to its state? Is it returned as highly productive or not?
Good afternoon, and thanks for your presentation. The addition that has been requested to objective number 1 is making reference to recognising some resources and associated activities are locationally constrained. If there is a separate objective provided, is that addition needed?
In my view, that one is needed because my understanding of the way these objectives work is that first objective, number 1, is more about assisting with determining where zones or precincts may occur. And in that sense, it would be helpful to have an objective that relates to, or that provides some direction for activities that are locationally constrained.
Okay.
And may inform what zone or precinct is appropriate.
Right, so
Which will lead further on to the remainder of our session will address at a later stage.
objective number 1 then says that the district develops in a cohesive and structured way that, and you're suggesting that it then goes on, structured in a way that recognises that some resources are locationally constrained. The thought that I have is that recognising something doesn't actually give any particular outcomes. It's a bit like saying take into account. At an objective level, should there be a more action-orientated verb?
Let me ponder that question.
Okay, while you're pondering, when it talks about some resources are constrained, I guess you're talking about the coal under the mine, under the ground, which equally could be gold under the land. The associated activities are more flexible in their location and in many cases are not locationally constrained. So a grain farmer takes the grain off his property and drives 10 kilometres to where it's processed. Is the coal really, the processing of the coal really locationally constrained? I'll give you a moment to think about recognisers.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, more directive wording could be used there instead, something along the lines of manages activities that are locationally constrained. The words manages activities instead of recognises.
Okay, turning to your paragraph 17 on the additional objective that you're talking about. The verb at the end says that the activities are provided for. Now, in terms of the hierarchy of verbs and level of protection, provided for implies it will be a permitted or controlled or restricted discretionary activity. So I guess what is your expectation then as to how the objectives, how the policies and rules would flow from an objective that says provide for?
My anticipation for a rule framework following on from an objective like that would be a restricted discretionary or a discretionary rule for an activity such as this.
Okay. I'm thinking.
This objective is reasonably broad at this high level, so there might be further provisions that narrow the activity down a bit further and then lead on to the rule framework, which I would suggest would be controlled or restricted discretionary activity.
Right. So what that points to is, would an objective of this type be better expressed as a policy?
It's not dissimilar to some of the other objectives in this suite of objectives in terms of its wording.
Yeah, I've got a couple more threads to pull. So the first is, when I was reading through Ms Justice's evidence, I was looking for some reference to the National Planning Standards for a couple of reasons. So I'll pull those two threads now. So one of them is to do with the definitions in there that do point to locational need and operational need. And so just wondering, was there any reason for not referencing the National Planning Standards and the, well, that first, was there anything, was it just an oversight, or had you thought about the relationship of those standards with this topic?
Is there a reason we've talked about, we've utilised
That's the ones. Yep.
I'm just going to bring those definitions up if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Remind ourselves.
Just while you're bringing up the definition, I guess, with the general term of that objective 12, I'm thinking with a gold resource that's located within a highly significant landscape, an objective of the type that you've asked for, and objective 12 would be saying you're providing for the mining of the gold, and you'd have some conflict with the landscape values. So how would you propose reconciling the two there? Yes. So where you had conflict between the location of a resource like gold or coal within a highly significant landscape area, how would you reconcile the enabling way that you've expressed objective 12 with the need to protect the landscape values? Which leads to, where do you see the priority being given to the objectives in this part of the plan? Do you see them sitting above the objectives of other parts of the plan? Yes, in the urban form and development chapter, where do you see the objectives in that part sitting above the objectives in other parts of the plan? I'll let you get back to functional need question then.
Yeah, so, and thank you for correcting me earlier. So, yeah, it's functional need and operational need that are sitting in the national planning standards. And between those two definitions, they pick up the idea of location and they pick up the idea of the technical. And so that's really what I wanted to lean into. And obviously,
Yeah.
national planning standards, we must use them.
Those terms are kind of, can be used interchangeably, I think. We used locationally constrained, but functional and operational need would do the same job.
And also, those terms are the ones that pop up in the national direction, if we're being consistent there.
Yes, that's true, yeah. Yeah. So I think that, using those terms would be useful if these provisions are to apply to that broader suite of activities where this issue arises. And, would link in with, for example, the National Policy Statement on renewable energy generation, potentially the EPS for electricity transmission and so on as well. So there'd be good kind of alignment, I suppose, with those other planning documents as well.
And I think that's quite important given we have to give effect to them. It's better that we are creating clarity for users. And then following on in relation to the national planning standards and seeing that New Vale are pointing towards a new special purpose zone, this is a question that I'll have in relation to each of the zones that are already proposed, and given that you're sort of offering that up as another option that New Vale would want to take advantage of. The national planning standards have a test in them for when a special purpose zone is appropriate, and so that was another reason I was looking to hear from either or both of you around the relationship of the national planning standards to what you're talking about and what you're asking for.
If I'm to be, I suppose, a little bit candid, the special purpose zone in a way was to sort of give us good scope, recognising that the provision for New Vale within the plan was going to be a new thing that would come in through submissions. So I think there's certainly, and we've been doing some further thinking at our end following sort of informal conversations with the Section 43 writers about whether the special purpose zone is the right solution or whether it's a precinct or something. So, yeah, that's something I think we'd like to perhaps address in the next round when we look at more specifically at the zone that we've proposed in the submissions and so on, if that was okay.
Absolutely fine. It was. This is the beginning of many conversations, and just a good time to highlight issues. So thanks. That's definitely me. Oh, actually no. Sorry, I'm just going to check one more thing. And it was paragraph 14. This is definitely the last thing. Paragraph 14 of Ms. Justice's evidence, where she states that the MPSFM is not directly relevant to DC functions. And I just wanted to, I'm going to ask this question of pretty much everybody, how as a panel we discharge our responsibilities in relation to clause 3.54 of the MPSFM. It is something that we have to give effect to, and it would be good to have people's thoughts on how do we discharge those responsibilities that are signalled for territorial authorities.
What was the clause reference? 3.45.
Other way around, 3.54. Unless I've typoed it, I'll just... That's the one. I'm now trying to find it myself. Yep.
Not 3.50. It doesn't go that high, thankfully. Every generation.
Yeah, that's the one.
But to me, and just having a brief read of that, that relates to, my mind, to urban development and managing perhaps reticulated water services.
And
discharge of those into the wider environment.
yeah, and so that would, if you're looking back at your evidence, do you want to just adjust your paragraph 14 and in any way?
Yeah, well, in that sense, the MPS area is relevant to territorial authorities. And I would just draw attention to that clause you referenced, which is 3.5.4.
Yeah, and you've
Relates to urban development, managing the effects of urban development.
yeah, so you, not directly relevant to New Vale, but good to get it sorted. Thank you. And that definitely is me. Tools down. Thank you very much.
Matt, existing use, activity and rights as it pertains to mining. And I take that the nature of mining is not static, it moves across the landscape. And I guess the other part of my question is that modified if mining goes into a special purpose zone?
So my understanding, existing use rights will come down to scale and intensity. So as long as that's continued, like the scale doesn't significantly increase and the intensity is similar, and existing use rights would apply. If there's a special purpose zone or a precinct that specifically provides for mining and additions through consent processes, then existing use rights would still apply, but they may be overtaken because those things are now provided for in the plan.
Beg your pardon, would you like to pose that question again?
She wants to explain.
Could I just address that question around existing use rights in relation to New Vale?
Yes.
Yes, it does. It allows your...
No, she wants to talk to it.
Ah, okay. By all means.
Yeah, so there effectively
but I guess at the same time, it doesn't exclude Greenbrier applying for further consent to enlarge the area on their own footprint. And I suppose that would be required to be considered in a special purpose zone, how that was described. So in one sense, it's not an impediment, but I take your point, thank you. Do you have anything to add from any more submission points? We'll thank you for your submission, and we'll now move on to another submitters, which I think is Hokonui Runanga. We have a representative, or we're online.
Just going to have a quick.
Okay.
10 minutes.
We're not actually, but we can take a break for 10 minutes and then we'll be back with Hokonui Runanga and then Groundswell. But I've got Hokonui Runanga here
3:10.
at 3:45.
2:3:45. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yep.
So, sorry? Yeah, we can put them. Lindsay,